Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Flight Safety Committee webinar on the subject of scalable safety management systems. And the general idea is, how do you do that on limited resources with all the requirements in all the international guidance documents seeming quite overwhelming at times? So we'll try today to cut through some of that complexity and get down to the gist of it and how it actually can be done. I'd like to introduce our speakers to you today. We have Bob Barron, who's the president of the Aviation Consulting Group. How are you, Bob?
Good, how are you?
Good, well, thank you. And Ian Holder, who's the managing director of Bain Simmons. Welcome, Ian, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. In the nice, cool, air-conditioned office right now for those in the UK.
Lucky you, I'm sweating away here. And we have Anita Favor from a small operation in Africa, which is with some very practical experience. Welcome, Anita. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's Boskovic Air Charters at Wilson Airport in Nairobi, I believe. And then we have Stuart Stevenson from British Airways. Stuart whilst BA is not a small operator, Stuart has some experience of implementing safety management systems in small operations. Welcome, Stuart. How are you?
Thanks. Good afternoon. All good. Yep, staying cool like everybody else. Thanks.
Very good. Okay, so the outline for today is that a few of us will give say a few words on our perspective on how this safety management system can be implemented with limited resources, and then we'll have a panel discussion. And then we'll get into some questions from the audience. So without further ado, should I hand over to you, Bob, to kick us off with that?
All right, well, thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me on, and welcome everybody. Just so you know, I'm in South Carolina, United States, on the East Coast here. So even though it's warm, I know that a lot of you guys are experiencing some pretty intense heat. So I wish you well with getting your air conditioning or turning the heat off outside eventually, right? I just want to let everybody know that I don't have PowerPoints. I'm not doing a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just basically doing this as some bullet points to talk about, because I think, or at least I know, the rest of our presenters will be showing you some slides and some other things like that. So I think altogether, you'll get the whole picture here. Again, my stuff will be just verbally like I'm doing right now. So anyway, I've been involved with SMS implementation and training for about 20 years now. So I've seen a lot of things out there. And one of the biggest issues these days, mostly here, when I talk about here, I'm talking about in the United States, there's the problem of companies that are small, that they don't understand the SMS. They don't know what it really is. And they think it's a complex system that's a standalone system. I've seen large companies try to make their SMS small, okay, which is interesting because they don't want to do the work. So they try to make the whole thing just, with something in the pocket that'll go away eventually or something like that. But I have also seen some companies small companies that try to make their SMS big because they're not informed. We're talking about a 5 aircraft Part 135 charter operator, and they're saying, oh, we've got to have this and that. We have to have a safety department, and we have to have safety action committee and safety review board and things like that. And they get lost in the whole thing. So it goes both ways. But again, the whole purpose of this presentation is for the smaller operators. Okay, they contact me sometimes in a panic. How do we scale SMS to fit our small organization? I tell them right off the bat, I say, okay, well, using the FAA Part 5 as an example, and of course you guys have a similar thing over there. I tell them that the principles are all the same. Okay, you're not cutting out things, you're not adding things. The principles are going to remain the same, and that it's likely that you already have a lot of these SMS elements already in place. Okay, then they relax because they're like, oh, okay, it's not this whole separate program. We have to invest $100,000 because we don't have that kind of money. So then they start to relax. Say, oh, okay, it can be scaled. What's important is the thing to keep in mind is that there's flexibility with the SMS implementation. Guidance tells us, regulatory guidance tells us what needs to be done, but not how it has to be done. So that's a key point there, okay? The regulatory requirement says you need this, so there's no one way of making whatever this is happen. So scalability becomes much simpler. So when we talk about scalability, based on everything I just talked about, we're talking about making the SMS fit your size company. So you may have to or need to combine roles. And again, this depends. Some smaller, it's all relative. Okay, there's very, very small organizations, and then there's some larger, smaller organizations, if you know what I mean. So you may combine roles. You put the safety manager, chief pilot, director of operations into a combination role because you can. Now, you won't do that with a large organization. You're not going to do that with British Airways. And I've seen things like that before, even with some of the bigger companies. You've got a safety manager wearing 3 or 4 hats. I'm the safety manager, compliance officer, quality assurance guy, and I do security and things like that. So they're wearing multiple hats, which I don't think is a good idea. But in a small organization, you may need to do that. That's perfectly fine. You don't need to hire extra people to run the SMS. Then the question comes up, well, okay, how am I going to manage the SMS? Okay, software is nice to have. And there's software out there that is scalable to a smaller organization. So you don't need to spend $20,000 a month on SMS software. Okay, so you can get software at a reasonable price that is scaled to the size of your company. But again, there's no one way of doing this. If you're a really small company, you may not need SMS software or want it. And you can use things like Excel or Google Forms, paper logs. It's fine to do that. It's kind of old school to just use spreadsheets and all that to manage your SMS. But you know what? If your company is that small and you only do a couple of operations a day or a dozen operations per week, like a charter company, a small charter company or something like that, then that would be fine. Just using some of the manual tools versus the SMS software. With a small organization, keep the documentation short. Okay, you don't need a 100-page SMS manual, for instance. Same thing with like a safety policy. People think, oh, our safety policy has to be 5 pages long and talk about every single thing that we do. No. A good safety policy will be generally it's 1 page that just goes over the typical items of, how we do safety. The accountable manager signs it, or the president or the highest level in the organization signs it and says, okay, here's what we do. And most importantly, the safety policy should always reflect the fact that it's a non-punitive reporting company, that if people submit a voluntary report, that there should be no repercussions or any negative consequences for the person who submits that report. That should be, part of the safety policy, the non-punitive aspect of it. Also, when it comes to SPI, safety performance indicators, you need to have them, but you don't need 500 safety performance indicators. If you're a small company, take a look at, start from the top down. What are the biggest, what are the things we want to measure? What are our goals? How are we going to get there? What are our targets? Safety performance targets. And they can be created. And once again, if it's simple, it's going to be very easy to do. versus, if you overdo the SPIs. And Rob, if I'm going over my time allotment, just let me know, because I tend to blah, blah, blah quite a bit. So if we're good, we're good. I don't have that much more. Also, conduct informal safety meetings. Informal is the key. It doesn't have to be this big deal like at a major company or a major airline or a maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility. You don't need to have this big formal meeting. It could just be informal, but have some safety meetings. Get together, even if it's over a cup of coffee. Discuss things. The open communication obviously is such an important part of SMS when you talk about safety promotion. There's other things too here. I don't want to ramble too much, but when it comes to safety policy, once again, keep it simple. You don't need to go overboard with documentation. Your gap analysis, you need to know where you stand on your SMS with your gap analysis. Even if you're a small organization, that has to be done. But I have seen some companies where they don't even look at the gap analysis. They just say, oh, we're going to start writing our manual. And I'm like, that's not going to work. Safety risk management. When we talk about safety risk management, in my opinion, SMS, that's the core of SMS. When the regulator comes to your door and says, let's see your SMS, yeah, they're interested in policy. Yeah, they're interested in safety assurance. Yeah, they're interested in safety promotion and all that. But the key is it's about risk management. So even in a small organization, get that hazard log going. Look at the hazards that could be specific to your operation and maybe nobody else's, okay? But you have to do that. And then you have to put risk mitigation processes in place to address those hazards, okay? Even if you're a small company. But again, you're not going to have this massive amount of data that you have to go through if you're a smaller company. Safety assurance, once again, making sure the SMS is doing what it's supposed to do, make sure it's functioning. You can do an internal audit of your own SMS. That may not be objective, so you may have somebody from the outside come in to conduct that for you to make sure it's a neutral, objective, third party gap analysis. And then, of course, safety promotion. With a small company, safety promotion can just be, hey, let's talk about this over lunch. Let's have a quick meeting in the break room or whatever, or go out to dinner. Talk about things like that. Safety promotion. What have you been seeing? What have you been doing? Is anything on your mind that's been gnawing at you that you think we should address? And then discuss those things. And of course, there's going to be documentation related to all of that, but the documentation would be scaled to your size operation. I got a few more here, just as far as pitfalls go, some of the things that some smaller operators have a hard time with. Assuming they have an SMS because they have a handbook or SOPs, or they follow the regulations. They think that is the SMS. It's like, well, we follow the regulations. Well, that's incorrect. That's not an SMS. It's part of the SMS, but it's not the SMS itself. Which also brings up the point of some people think that just having an SMS manual instead of a full SMS, they think a manual is actually the SMS itself, and it's not. I hope some of the other presenters will talk about a little bit of these things that I'm talking about to shed some more light on it. But that's a big problem I see. But with a small operator, again, your SMS manual should just be reflecting your safety management system and follow the 12 elements of IKO. So basically, that's it. Some companies create forms no one uses. Some companies skip the SPIs. And again, I'm talking about the smaller companies. They don't think SPIs are important. But when the regulator comes in, a POI or a PMI from the FAA, let's say, comes in and says, show me your SMS, and you can't show them SPIs, then you can't, because SPIs are going to measure how you're doing. It's a yardstick, it's a gauge. So if this is increasing and it shouldn't be, or these are decreasing and they shouldn't be, we want to know about that. So without SPIs, you're kind of naked, if you will. Also, no management of change process, because they don't understand what management of change is. Safety manager with no authority. I call it a de facto safety manager. It's like, are you really the safety manager? It's like, well, no, I'm not. So just by default, somebody in the company sort of becomes the quasi de facto safety manager. You may not need a safety manager for a very small company, but as the company grows, safety manager is an important position. And then finally, well, actually, I just kind of covered that next bullet point too. Somebody has to be in charge of the SMS. Regardless if you have a safety manager or not, someone needs to own the SMS to make sure that it's constantly updated and nurtured. Because as you all know, it's not a static system. It changes, and sometimes rapidly. So you have to watch out for that. So somebody has to be in charge, even if it's a 5-employee operation. Otherwise, if you think you can implement and forget it, then you're going to have problems with it. And that's only half of what I had to say, but that's all I have for that.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your perspective on that. And we'll now hand over to Ian Holder from Bain Simmons for his words.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Over to Ian.
I'm going to build on what Bob has said and perhaps look at it through a slightly different perspective. I do have some slides, so hopefully they will appear on screen in a moment. So this is actually a presentation, or part of a presentation I gave to the SMICG, the Safety Management International Collaborative Group, just a few days ago. When Rob suggested coming on this webinar, it occurred to me actually that the same things I was talking about there, which was really aimed at very large organizations, 100,000 plus in some of them, actually are just as pertinent to small organizations. I think some of the solutions in how you implement your management system is how you actually scale it. And to Stuart's point in the chat, you're right, Stuart, of course. You still need to have a robust management system. You still need to have robust controls in your organization, regardless of size. It's how you get there that is the scalable part. So let me talk about the integrated management system then. What is it that we are advocating here? So I go into a lot of organizations, or we as a consultancy and training business are very fortunate to get to see a lot of organizations. And very commonly, I see organizations seeing SMS, a phrase I don't tend to use very often, actually. I tend to advocate calling it the management system, the EASA terminology, for this very reason. But I see them seeing SMS, compliance, security, ISO, finance, employment law. They have all of these management systems in place, and they see SMS regulations, which we know is coming into different parts of aviation. 135 Bob mentioned over in the States, and of course we have MRO and Part 21 activities and ground handling as well. So a lot of organizations are coming to SMS for the first time, which those of us in Air Ops did sort of 15 years ago. And they think it's a bolt-on. They think they've got to add it, yet another management system, yet another person I've got to employ, yet more software, more processes. And I'm going to advocate that actually that just isn't the case. You will already have, as Bob said, much of this in place, but it might not be where you think it is. For example, it might be you already have a reporting system because you have a requirement from a HR perspective to have a whistleblower policy. You already have many of these things in place. And I think the important point is all of these requirements, and ISO 9001, I guess many of you probably are ISO 9001 organizations, really gets to the heart of this. They're all asking you to do the same thing, whether it's financial management, cybersecurity, physical security. They're all asking you, what are the issues we might be facing? How serious are they? Is it a compliance? And now I always say, remember, compliance are risk controls that somebody else has learned. So compliance and risk are not two separate things. They're just controls that somebody else knows. How serious is it? If it's compliance, you need to be able to resolve it. If it's your own risk, you need to make a decision yourself for whether you're going to apply more controls. Are those controls working? Monitor them, and then assure yourself that system is working. That's what all of these management systems are asking you to do. And at their heart, they look like this. So we have a need to comply with some regulations. Again, could be finance, could be aviation regulations. So we need to put a structure in the organization that can comply with them. We need to have the procedures, processes, the tooling, etc., to be able to comply with those regulations. And we need to be able to monitor that we are complying with them. Wrapped around those regulations with the compliance monitoring system, something we're all very familiar with. And of course, our human factors error management, our reporting and investigation processes. And wrapped around all of that are, what are the risks that we particularly face as an organization, both enduring ones and specific ones through management of change. And then wrapped around all of that is the things that actually makes it work. But it doesn't matter what regulations I look at, that is the management system they're asking us to put in place. Look at it a different way, and a little bit of theory here, and then we'll talk about how do we actually make this work. All of your organizations have some kind of output. You all have a reason why you exist and a purpose. So you'll have an operational product or some kind of output. Along with that output, you will be managing compliance and you will be managing risk. So this is on the left-hand side here, the ensure part. From all of that will come data. To Bob's point about SPIs, and I'll perhaps talk a bit more about that in a moment, we've got to be very clear what the data is that we actually want to be managing. But you'll get all that data, you'll do analysis of it, that will feed back into your system, and you do continuous improvement. It's very clear that that is owned by those functional departmental managers, accountable persons, nominated persons in the aviation language, but they may be head of finance, you may have various people in your organization who own the doing of business, doing it compliantly and managing the risk. They are supported on the right-hand side by what's often referred to as safety manager, compliance manager, with lots of different names. The first thing I'd advocate in small organizations is at least safety and compliance should be one. Even in large organizations, I actually say they should be one. They are just different methods of gathering similar data. And all this is doing is supporting those functional managers by offering some independence that then feeds back into their own continuous improvement. That's what we're looking to try and achieve in all areas. What makes any system work, and for me, the most important one here is culture. Culture eats process for breakfast is a phrase that's often used. If your people naturally expect from themselves and from their colleagues to do the right thing the first time, and as soon as they recognize something isn't quite going as they would wish it to, they stop and correct it and tell somebody, then you're in a fantastic position already. And that is that culture piece. You cannot isolate safety from everything else. So you can't say we're going to build a just culture, we're going to get people doing safety reporting in one sense, and then in the other sense we have don't tell anybody about any cyber issues that you're having, or if you click a phishing email then we're going to punish you for that. Those two things are not lined up. So we've got to make sure that we're building a culture over all the things we ask our people to do. And culture is driven in the main by active leadership and how leaders engage in the organization. Okay, theory over. What does it actually look like? What am I advocating for here? Take all of your management systems as far as is reasonably practical for you as an organization, depending on your size, and build a horizontal system, I call it. So what does that look like in practice? You have a single reporting form if people are reporting into you. You then need to triage that as an organization. So are they telling us there's a HR problem? Are they telling us there's an operational safety problem? Are they telling us that something is out of compliance in finance? You can build that into a single form. Now, you might all be saying, but hang on a minute, triaging that is going to be incredibly complicated. In this modern day of AI, and we can't have any conversation without somebody mentioning AI, it really isn't. It is amazing at triaging and sending reports to the right person. You still need a human involved in that system to assure that's doing it right, but tooling that, building that process is really, really straightforward. You need to be able to redirect it if it gets anything wrong, but I promise you, once you've taught the tool, it gets very little wrong. So triaging is really very simple these days. For me, one of the really important bits is the governance structure. So Bob mentioned this about people saying, okay, I've got to have an SMS, so I need to have safety action group, safety review board, all these things. Well, no, you're already having departmental meetings. You already have some kind of board meeting that is sorry, I just lost control of the thing there. You're already having board meetings of some description that's reviewing financial performance, outputs, etc. You've already got all these things in place. So just embed it into what is already there. My one big bugbear is risk models. I see organizations trying to compare risks using entirely different language, different matrices. How on earth can a CEO of an organization decide where to put their resources if finance is saying something is red and when the equivalent thing in operations is green, or however you're doing it? It just becomes impossible. So one single risk model, it is quite straightforward to take a risk model and just change subtly the language for different areas of the business so you have equivalence of risk. By doing all of that, all your data can come into a single place. If I go back to, we talked about the safety and compliance manager, a very small organization, you might call that person a risk and compliance manager. They might be the company secretary. They might also be, an aviator, a mechanic. They could be, depending on the size of the organization, that person could be managing all of your risk and compliance systems. Remember, that person doesn't own risk and compliance. That's functional managers that own it, but they're providing them the tools to do it. It can just be one person in a very small organization. Why might organizations want to do this? Well, it's mad having all these separate management systems. I said earlier, ISO 9001, I'm sure many of you have this. Actually, it is very much the same as Part 5, as ORO Gen 200. It just looks at it through a different lens. There is some talk in ICAO about being much more permissive of organizations, saying actually we have a single management system, we have an ISO approval, and we can demonstrate how that meets all our other approvals. I think we should ponder on the fact, though, that I've just touched on, is there is one difficulty with this approach, and that is regulators. Regulations themselves are written in silos. Although they're all asking for exactly the same thing, they're written in different regulations, and it's different regulators coming in. So as you're doing this, you do need to make sure that you're tagging everything so that you can break it out. So, for example, if you're having a board meeting, which is also your safety review board, we need to be able to show on there where our operational safety matters are, so that we can show that to our aviation inspector. And I say to you, as you're building this, get your regulators in so that actually they are coming on the journey with you. I think that is a really critical part. So there you go. So I would advocate you don't need to bolt on another management system. You already have the bones of it there. You just need to make sure that we are looking at all of our data. Bob mentioned SPIs. That's probably my final point, is it's not about the indicators, it's about the questions you're asking of the system. What is my key performance question? What do I want to know? And then go and look what the indicators are and be reporting on that. You've all got lots of data. Even small organizations have lots of data. What gets measured gets done. Tend to keep looking for what's the easy data to get. Let's see if we can change something about that. No, what are the key performance questions? How well are we managing safety? How do we know we're managing safety that well? And what are we doing about it? And we're asking those same questions in finance and everywhere else. that is me. I will stop presenting there and hand back to Rob.
That's great. Thank you, Ian. A very interesting perspective there. I would just say to the audience, if you've got some questions, please, I know you're all muted, but you can put them into the chat and we will pick them up later on. So please do that if you have some questions that come to mind during these opening talks. So Anita, can I hand over to you to get your perspective on implementing an SMS in a smaller shore operation? Or I think you've got a fleet of caravans and a King Air there and around 15 aircraft. So that would be very interesting to hear from you.
Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity. I hear you guys are struggling with heat. Over here it's freezing, so in terms of that heat away, you'll appreciate it. Oh well, so allow me to just speak without sharing my screen. I hadn't quite prepared slides for this. But I hope that I can share some insights that will add value to your team. Bob and Ian have shared quite extensively, and I'd like to maybe narrow down to data analysis. I personally am quite interested in how artificial intelligence can help small teams scale up and maximize the team that they have and the resources that they have. As small operators, we have one common factor: limited resources. And I'd like to clarify that I do not speak for my company. I am not sharing any particular insights that are about what we do internally. So I'd like for you to take away what is relevant to you and kindly do not quote it as Anita said, Boskovic does 1, 2, 3. All right. So if you're operating a small or medium-sized fleet, perhaps just a few aircraft, your safety department probably isn't a massive corporate floor. It's likely just 1 or 2 people. So this means that you're wearing multiple hats and you're facing a very real safety paradox. We are inundated with information, yet starving for actionable insights that actually drive real safety improvements. Currently, safety teams spend 80% of their time on data entry and cleaning, leaving only 20% for actual risk mitigation. And this brings us to a critical question that every small operator must ask. If your safety officer is spending 4 hours daily on Excel spreadsheets, who is actively watching the flight line? We are traditionally stuck in review management, asking what happened, what could we have done better. This is through standard reporting most of the time. I believe we each have a form of safety reporting that works for our organizations, and maybe we can hear from the audience which challenges they're facing with that. With limited resources, we can't afford to just react. We need to move to predictive intelligence, which helps us ask and answer the question, how do we prevent that from happening again? This is a very valuable question for any safety team, and I believe that you agree regardless of the capacity you have or the fleet size that you have. This is where artificial intelligence comes in. If you have just 1 or 2 people on your team, once you bring in artificial intelligence to help you automate the mundane, your subject matter experts are able to focus on what actually matters for the safety department. And we can look at AI as a force multiplier. By automating data tasks, AI allows safety teams to refocus the 80% of their time on active risk mitigation. Safety is not merely the absence of accidents, it is the presence of capacity. And this is what I advocate for AI's value. It significantly adds to the capacity of a safety team. You might be wondering what this actually looks like in practice. The challenge for small teams lies in the noise to signal ratio buried within narrative pilot reports and maintenance logs. I would also like to hear perspectives from the audience on what challenges they get in the format that their pilots or their maintenance engineers, or even just general staff members? What challenges do you face by how they report? Do those reports make sense to you? What could be improved? And we can learn from each other. Valuable intelligence is hidden in unstructured text. The key insight is that most critical safety intelligence often lives in the narrative space between quantitative data points. And large language models, which I believe most of us have heard about, LLMs, they enable sophisticated sentiment analysis across thousands of reports, processing 1,000 plus pilot reports in seconds to find these hidden human factors. If you were to do this manually, 1,000 pilot reports could take a whole week at best. And for lean integration, you really don't need the big tech price tag. Now, I know that you're thinking, I run a 2-person safety team. How can we afford to implement this without a massive budget? The answer is a lean integration strategy. You do not need a costly rip and replace of your current systems. Whichever systems you're using for reporting, for analysis, or even flight operations management, you do not need to replace them. Instead, you can layer AI over what you already have. This could be done by the system software developers, or you just leverage whatever you can export from these systems and leverage AI to maximize the input you get from it. So the first layer could be your foundation. You could leverage your existing SMS software platforms and then use secure APIs to feed your operational data into a private, compliant LLM environment. This is crucial. You don't want your data on a open source LLM where anyone from outside could easily hack and access. So this is where maybe you can incur just a small bit of cost, whereby you get a private LLM account for your organization or even just for the safety department, so that you securely process your data. And for visibility, you can output these insights to business intelligence platforms like Power BI. I'd also like to hear from the audience what your experience with Power BI has been and maybe what you think you could advise other people to do with this. And by syncing AI processing with BI narration, you create a dynamic dashboard that reveals risk velocity, measuring how rapidly specific hazard trends towards critical thresholds, rather than just showing us static total of incidents. The one thing that I appreciate with AI is that it reveals trends that will take you a long time to identify. And especially if you're not conversant with data analysis, you would really struggle to identify these trends. If you're only looking at reports and narratives and past occurrences without really looking at massive data, you would easily miss out on these trends. And this is where the safety team needs to be focusing their attention. What has been recurring? Why has it been recurring? And what can we do better to prevent it from becoming an accident? Ultimately, we are talking about creating augmented analysts. AI doesn't make the safety decisions, it empowers you to make better ones. This is what we call human in the loop. Furthermore, AI supports a just culture by instantly de-identifying reports. Protecting reporters while extracting vital lessons is really important. You do not want to put people's names out there. No system is 100% secure. So in the event that malicious people get a hold of your data, you wouldn't want anyone's names to be associated with it. So it's important to de-identify reports before you feed them into any large language model or any external tool that's used for data analysis. By maintaining transparent and explainable AI, we keep the human in the loop and maintain accountability. So I once talked to a team in Nairobi, and someone mentioned something really disappointing. They said that the intern had fed their data to AI and made a decision that was putting the company in a financial loss. Well, not the entire financial system was crashing, but they claimed that the intern's decision led to some loss of money for the company. And this is disappointing if safety managers are letting interns make decisions. That's why we are talking about human in the loop. Not only can AI make mistakes, but your juniors could also make mistakes. So as the seniors of these safety departments, I encourage you to really verify whatever information you're getting from any tool whatsoever, whether it's AI powered or not, or it's your junior staff, your interns, even your direct reports. You need to be the person making the final decision because safety is so critical. You can't have an accident and blame AI. That would really look bad on you. And it's our responsibility to keep our people safe and our aircraft safe. So let's pay close attention to whatever decisions you're making that is made or attributed to any tool whatsoever. And to wrap up, just as the world leapfrogged landlines, aviation operators have a leapfrog opportunity right now. We can bypass legacy paper Excel systems and go to cloud and AI intelligent safety systems. If there is one message to take away today, it's that effective SMS doesn't have to be complex or expensive, but it does need to be focused. Give your team the capacity, see what is coming, and transform your narrative data into strategic action. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Anita. Very interesting perspective, and I certainly recognise that I think in any size of organisation, that risk management piece does consume so much time of the staff there. Before we go to the panel, I've got a few slides I'll just run quickly through with you. So I will share my screen. Stand by. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about how you might set this up from scratch, and I like to think of this in terms of people before paper. So for me, in a management system, safety management system, your people are the most important resource, the most important part of the whole thing. So before you start writing manuals, engage the people. And ultimately, I see this as a better way to do business, because the thought processes of a safety management system are actually a sensible way to run a business. In fact, we in our daily lives do a lot of these kind of thought processes when we plan things and make changes to our lives, make big decisions. In a lot of ways, we think along these same lines. And so I see this as helping the business, not in any way getting in the way. And I know there are 4 traditional elements of a safety management system, but if you're starting out, I would go for leadership, communication, standards, and then bring in the systems. So at the beginning, you're going to need the boss to support this initiative. You're going to need to communicate to your people what you're doing and what their role is going to be in that. And you are trying to create an environment in which everybody is involved. You will have standards that you want to operate to, and those should be stated. And you want everybody to buy into that and tell you when those standards are for some reason compromised. And in the dynamic environment that we know is aviation, on any given day, certain parts of the operation will be different, will be compromised by changes that are happening. You do need to know about those things that are going on so that you can do something about them. And finally, a system to capture all of this, which would be your risk management and safety assurance piece. And this applies not just to what you do, but if you're looking to do something new, which traditionally is called change management, but essentially is the same idea. And so that communication piece for me is the most important part of any SMS, and that safety promotion element is usually last on the list when it probably should be at the top, because getting people to buy into what you're doing, believe in what you're doing, be part of it, share with you when things are not going right, and come up with ideas because they're on the front line of ways that things can be improved is absolutely crucial. If you just want people to come in on time, do their job, obey the rules and go home on time, that's not the way to continuously improve your operation. You want them fully engaged and bought into what you're doing. And that team dynamic is a two-way street. So you're going to look after them, treat them fairly, train them well, give them help when they need it, and they're going to tell you where you're going wrong, where things can improve, and then that's a mutually beneficial relationship for both the organization and the individual. And I like to see it like that. It's a coactive culture where all of those system things like risk management and safety assurance float on that sea of open culture and communication. And then, of course, if you've done that, write it down. And as Bob said, don't write, War and Peace. It can be done on half a page, but you can capture that on half a page because it's come from your leadership. It's come from your communication that you do to your people. That is essentially your policy. That's what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And so if you've got covered all of that in terms of the 12 components of a safety management system, you've already got management, commitment and responsibility, safety policy and objectives, safety promotion, reporting and investigation, safety planning and safety communications and safety training. You've already ticked all of those boxes already, and doesn't require a great deal of resource to do all of that. Moving on to one of the systemic things, and I think I need to cover this very well, the challenges here, because this is a time resource sponge for sure, and trying to get all of that surrounding contextual information to make an objective assessment of a risk is a real challenge. There's so much subjectivity in what could potentially be the worst case outcome, what really is our exposure to this. And so there's plenty of guidance around to help you, and matrices and methodologies to try and guide you to the most objective possible result. And I'd love to hear more about Anita and the use of AI there in that, which we can talk about later on. I also mentioned that there's the guidance material is available from ICAO. The UKCA have tons of information on their website, as do IARSA, and I really like what CASA Australia have on their website too. The safety assurance piece for me is not about compliance and outcomes. In other words, just because your SPIs or are showing good trends or your reporting is low, that doesn't mean to say that you don't have. What are your standards like? What are the behaviors of your team like? Are they risk aware? Do they adapt to the circumstances of the day? And do they feel empowered to make the right decisions? All of those things add up to being a solid operation. And it's not just about obeying the rules and having no adverse reports. And of course, the final thing, which is relatively easy to do, is to try and get everyone together at the end of the year and say, how do we do as part of that assurance process? So we've ticked a few more of those boxes there. Documentation, which is the bit that certainly I don't like doing, who nobody really does. There is some guidance material out there to help you, and I would you can use AI. AI is great at drafting things, giving you a start. Use it iteratively, one chapter at a time. Ask it to do a bit more, build it up, and then review it. As Anita called it, the human in the loop is absolutely essential, but it can save you so much time in getting that initial draft ready. And if it won't do what you want it to do, ask it, because it will tell you how. If you ask it rather what do I need to ask you in order to get this result? It will tell you. And so it can train you how to use it as well. It's pretty good at that. Yeah, so I would encourage you to use AI in that way, because it will help you. Another way it can help you is if you have those meetings, as Bob was referring to, in a small organization, they may be around a social event even. Start a Teams meeting, set the meeting to transcribe, put the laptop in the middle of the table, and it will record what everyone says. And then at the end, you can click a button and you've instantly got a meeting recap. And now you've got some minutes, some documentation. So you're starting to, that's that kind of work. Manually doing minutes after a meeting is everyone's least favorite task, and AI can really help you get that done. Again, it needs a little bit of a review at the end to make sure it hasn't gone completely mad, but AI can really save you a lot of time in that respect. And then the last bit really is you do need an emergency response plan, and even big operations have relationships with third parties like Kenyon, and there are others around, because you just can't have all of the things that you might need in the event of an accident on hand all the time. In a small operation, it might just be you may have an emergency notification system and everyone has a duty in the event of an accident, and you have a third party to provide you all the support services. But it is an essential thing, an essential component of your SMS. So just to wrap up, that's my key principle is get the people involved. They're your biggest asset. They're going to tell you what's happening on the line. They're going to have the ideas on how to fix it. They're going to give you the context to all the data you've got. And if you've got that support from the top and you keep communicating that, then you're going to be able to maintain the standards that you set for yourself. And all of that will evolve into the systems that you use to capture all of that information and operate. So that's my my little short run through on how to do it with limited resources. I just want to I'll just run this little video from Simon Sinek about continuous improvement, which essentially at the end of the day, that is what we're all trying to do, is get better and better every day.
With American business today is you have massive outside forces forcing companies that are trying to stay in business so that some analyst or venture capitalist can meet their short-term incentive goal, whatever it is, so they give bad advice to CEOs so they can get their bonuses. One of my favorite CEOs is a public company, and he was on a phone with his analyst, and his analyst said, "Gary, I noticed you missed your numbers." And Gary said, "No, I missed your numbers. Mine are just fine." So the fact that you don't have those pressures where other people are putting pressure on you to meet their objectives is a huge benefit. And the fact that it's an organization that is trying every year to be a better version of itself. There's accountability. Look, we screwed some stuff up. We made some bad decisions. It's going to take some time to unravel some of those decisions. I love that, because that's called being human. That's all of us. There's no perfect company. There's no perfect person. There's no perfect business. It doesn't exist. It is a bumpy, messy road, like people. And the only goal we have is constant improvement. That's fundamentally what an infinite mindset is the objective to wake up and say, what little thing can I do today that makes me 1% better today than I was yesterday? Whether it's my marketing, whether it's my sales, whether it's my leadership, whether it's my culture, not huge leaps, just 1% better today. And it turns out if you do that every single day or every single week, it accumulates and you become a better version of yourself. And we wish best of luck to all the other competitors. The goal is, how do we make ourselves the best version of ourselves?
And that is essentially what we want to be able to do, is to improve a little by little by little by little, improve, always improve. Simon Sinek calls it an infinite mindset. That we often call safety management a marathon with no finish line. It's the same principle where we want to improve and keep improving and keep finding ways to improve along the road a little bit every day, and it all adds up to a significant difference. So that's it from me. Don't forget to follow the Flight Safety Committee on LinkedIn if you're not already. But I will stop sharing. So we have some questions in the chat here. What are the panel's view on priorities to fix an SMS that has over time become bloated and bordering on safety bureaucracy, swamping actual effective active risk management. An interesting one. That's not about, that's one that they feel the SMS has gone off track and become overly bureaucratic, and that bureaucracy is getting in the way of its effectiveness to deal with the risks. What do you think about that, Bob? I come to you first.
For me, are you talking about what? SMS bloat kind of?
Yeah,
Like,
they're saying that the paperwork and the bureaucracy is getting in the way of effective risk management.
with something like that, typically what I would do is look at it and say, okay, we have a problem, but then just do like a root cause analysis on it and say, okay, why did this happen? And then just go back and say, where did this go awry? Where did this go wrong? And then once you determine that, you know, where the breakdown was or where that bloating started to happen, then maybe take it from there and then say, okay, well, we know how this happened. Okay. We can try to fix it once we have that information. As you know, it may not be that easy when something derails, like an SMS, or let's say company culture. It could take years to build a good company culture and it can be killed overnight, right? So, you know, with something like SMS, it's the same type of concept where if something's wrong, you can't expect to fix it overnight. And you can't just take it from the current point where it's at and say, oh, well, we have to do better, we'll fix it, because nothing's going to change. So again, what I would do is look back and say, okay, well, what's the root cause of this? Why did this happen? When did this start happening? Get those details and then try to, you know, take that information and try to get back on track again.
Okay, thanks. What about you, Stuart? What do you think of that one?
I think it's interesting having been in large companies and smaller organizations. I think there's a tend to think that bloating only happens in large organizations, and it does, you know, and part of a large organization is that it is massively complex because as somebody pointed out there, you're trying to integrate health and safety, risk, etc., etc. I think whether you're a small or a large enterprise, you got to go back to basics. It sounds really obvious and it sounds massively oversimplistic, but taking what Bob's saying about root causes, go back to the stakeholders. Who is your accountable manager? Who are the people there? And just literally go back to the beginning and say, we're drowning here. We're drowning in numbers, stats, data, because we love data. And AI can generate as much data in as many formats as you wish. And it's all well intended, but we lose sight of what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, as safety professionals, compliance professionals, whichever role we're in here, you're only there because the accountable manager needs you to do that risk overview. So that's the point for me where you have to engage with the management team again and say, look, can we just get back to real basics here? For our organization, I think it was Stuart that mentioned earlier on about high risk operation or whatever. What are our big things that we are worried about? What's keeping you awake at night, Mr. or Mrs. Accountable Manager or Senior Manager? And what are the things that are really bothering you? Because all of that bloat that you've got will have that depth of detail in there somewhere, and start going back to that again about what you're doing. Because if you're creating a whole load of stuff just to keep the regulator happy or just to make it look cool for an audit or internal or otherwise, you're kind of missing the point, and we are missing the point. So it is really, for me, and I've been in that position, you just have to get back to basics. The accountable managers, and I've been an accountable manager, just need to know at a high level where their risks are. The rest of it is detail beyond that you get into as you cascade that through your small or medium or large organization. It is really just being absolutely clear what they see as their risks and starting from there again. Sounds simple, I know, but that's the only way you're going to go insane.
Thanks, Stuart. Ian.
I think the important thing, Stuart, is to understand if there is a difference in the way data is being presented at a board level and the lived experience in the workforce. If there's a difference between those two things, then why is there that difference? I think it's built to what Stuart was saying. Everybody has a different agenda within the system. The workforce just want to get the job done and go home safely to their family and move their people around or whatever it is they're doing. They usually want the organisation to be successful as well. Board members have other stakeholders and regulators and maybe shareholders to think about and have different sets of priorities, but the data should look the same. You can go and do that. As you know, Stuart, we do a lot of this kind of work where we go into organisations and find out what's really going on in the workforce. There are other ways of doing that. What is the lived reality? Paint that picture back to the board level. Say, look, all of this information, all this data you've got, the reality is really, really different. We need to streamline our system. It is nearly always about what SPIs are being set on middle management. That for me is where what gets measured gets done, and we tend to bias our measurements on what picture we want to see and on productivity rather than actually seeing the truth. So it's making sure we've got those. What are the key performance questions we're asking ourselves? What is the easiest way of getting that data? And seeing if there's a difference between what the workforce experience is and the CEO's experience. If it's different, then there's a problem, and you need to streamline and simplify.
Interesting. Thank you. Anita, I think you talked about using AI for this this issue of being overloaded with risk management.
Yes, I believe so. And I'd like to echo what Stuart and Ian have spoken about. Simplicity is the way to go for lean operations. And I'd say when you have a lot of data, especially from reports, it's important that you analyze it correctly. So, for example, if you have a whole spreadsheet with reports, you need to ask yourself, what 3 questions do you need this data to answer? That's where you'll get your pain points from. You can look at the frequency of hazards that have been reported. The people who are in your day-to-day operations, they understand where the shoe pinches. And once you analyze the reports they're making, you'll be able to understand what the actual problem is. Most of the time, we tend to go ask these key questions in the boardroom, yet the people with the answers are on the aprons. They're in our aircraft and in our hangars. These are the people who know where the critical issues are. The data can only tell us what they've already experienced. So it's important to also keep talking to these people, conducting surveys, attending departmental meetings, and making sure you're hearing what they're telling you, not just what you think they should be telling you. And this will help us identify key pain points and will help us make data-informed decisions. I believe AI is really good at synthesizing sentiments. We might look at a textual report and miss out on a hazard that has been mentioned therein. But once you're using artificial intelligence, it doesn't get fatigued like we do. It can look at numerous amounts of reports and numerous amounts of data, even from SPIs. You can look at which targets keep getting exceeded constantly or not attained. And these trends will help you identify where the real issues are.
Okay, I was interested that you talked about using a secure AI LLM. Is that something? Have you downloaded one of the open source ones to use it behind your own firewall, or are you subscribing to an LLM in the cloud but with security feature? I wasn't quite clear how you'd got that additional security.
I simply meant that it's safer or more secure to use a paid model instead of the free ones like ChatGPT or Gemini. It's better to use a paid one because it has added security features. And also, if you have a system already, the system providers have access to such LLMs as well. So once they integrate it into your existing systems, it's much more secure that way, since you don't have to export your data and feed it into a different LLM.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Same boat, loads of data, but poor at getting it to always tell us something. Very interesting with the idea of using AI. Any ideas of software? So someone's asking about, to just build on that question a bit, which software you use for the AI analysis?
I use Gemini. I prefer using Gemini for my own personal preferences. I do not necessarily advocate it over others, but you can do an analysis of what's in the market and identify which one suits your needs the best. Additionally, Microsoft has powerful AI as well. So this is good for companies with the Microsoft 365 license. If you're already using Microsoft as a company, advise them to go that way. But if it's individual, I personally use Gemini.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any experience of using AI on the panel there?
Maybe I can jump in there, Rob. And full
Sure.
disclosure, many of you will know Bain Simmons are part of Plus Flight, and therefore the Centric software platform is a sister organization to ourselves. So I can see from the developer, I spend a lot of time with our developers. So it's interesting talking to how they're approaching this. First thing, I echo what Anita says. Definitely make sure it's an enterprise solution that you have, that actually your data is secure in your system. There are lots out there. Claude is one that certainly we use a lot of and seems to be, for business use, seems to be growing in popularity over the likes of ChatGPT. What I will say, though, of course, is like us, like our Centric platform, developers are all looking to how do we use AI in the platform. As an example, we are developing tools where an individual making a report just literally talks into whatever device they have got. It will then compile the report, automatically put it in the system, automatically apply event risk classification, do all the triage for you, send it to the right people. All of that can be automated. One of the things talking to developers is really interesting is making sure that you're assuring the output as you go, as you're doing this. And you can build these tools yourselves. It's not necessarily a very small organization could be doing this and dropping it into Excel or using software. But you do need to make sure you're assuring it, and you do need to make sure the data is being controlled and that the AI is not bringing in hallucinations, which AI will do. So you need to train it in a very specific way to make sure it always treats things the same. But it's possible. And the other thing I'd say to questions around software is it might be seen as an expensive luxury at the smaller end buying particular software platforms, but most organizations, actually the pricing model is scaled as well. So it might not be as expensive as you think to actually have proprietary software so that you don't have to always work yourself. But to echo what Anita says, if you're not already very well versed in using AI, then it's beyond time to get well versed, I would say.
Thanks. There's another question here about should safety management become just part of the management system? And is the EASA and the UK CAA moving in that direction? That way compliance can be demonstrated once, reducing the risk of differences between the various aspects embedded in Part 145, Part 21, CAMO and OPS. But who would like to address that one?
I can only pick this up as an end user, I guess. Again, personal view here. It really depends on your organisation and your relationship with the regulator, whether that's going to work with you or not. My honest view of the regulators is they like to be partitioned. So they would rather have a 145 SMS in my world, a CAMO SMS, and whatever else. When I was in a smaller organisation, when it was just a 145 that I ran, that was easy because it was automatically integrated, if you like, and the only integration really was perhaps maybe with health and safety regulations. I think in law, I don't see that coming, and I don't mean to be disingenuous to the regulators because they're not of that mindset yet. It's easy to say as organisations that we live in silos. I think that the regulator naturally does too, and that's the way the regulation is sourced. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. I work for a large organisation now where it is very much an integrated management system, and we really struggle on audits because I have to challenge myself sometimes, and part of me thinks, oh God, I wish I just had my own blimmin' SMS in 145, and I have to remind myself that the ethos of the regulation is it is meant to be holistic and it is meant to be organisational, and frustrating as that is, it does keep me honest, and it does keep me right in what I'm doing, that there is a greater level of governance. I do find it challenging sometimes when we get a Part 145 audit that the regulator has to go over to our headquarters, because that's where the management system is actually governed really overall. So I don't see it happening anytime soon. I also not sure it's necessarily having a separate, I think somebody put a comment on there, having it a bit like Part IS where it's a thing that you have to comply with. I think one of the things we got right with SMS culture, wherever it came from, is it's embedded in your system. MS is your system. It's not oh, I've got an hour spare on a Friday afternoon, what am I going to do? I'll have a look at the management system. The idea and the ethos behind it is trying to keep the faith that it is integrated, it is part of your day-to-day language, and the meeting that you go for that's to do with delivery is also part of your management system, and that delivery KPI will affect safety SPIs as much as anything else. And we got to keep the faith that I might be retired by then, but it will become business as usual one day, and that management system is just how we do stuff.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Stuart. There's another one. How do we ensure that the reliance on AI does not erode human expertise, reduce critical challenge, or introduce new systemic safety risks that are difficult to identify and regulate? I mean, I think I'll come back to Anita's phrase, human in the loop. There's absolutely no possibility that you should rely totally on the output of AI without a human overview of it. It works on a basis of examining millions and millions of possibilities and coming up with the most likely one, and it will always produce that result if it's wrong. It's just the most likely, most probable correct answer that's come up with, and that's why we call it halluc. Sometimes it looks like it's hallucinating, so you can't rely on its output. And it will also, if you give it an accident report, it will give you, and you ask it for the recommendations. If you don't tell it that you want the recommendations in the report, it will give you its own recommendations. So you do have to be careful with it, and make sure that at all times all the output is checked by humans. Regarding integrated management systems, what do you mean by one risk model? Are you referring to a single risk matrix such as ICAO being applied across all types of risks such as safety, quality, and corporate risk? I believe it's challenging to use a single model from different perspectives. Is that a point from your talk, Ian?
I think so, yeah. So what I would say to that is if you look at imagine a traditional risk matrix, and there's arguments for and against risk matrix. Personally, I think the industry, we're going to move to a barrier-based thinking. How effective are our controls to the risks that we know? However, if you think about traditional risk matrix, it's simply a case of making sure that if you think top right and it says catastrophic, what does catastrophic mean in financial terms? What does catastrophic mean in cybersecurity terms? What does catastrophic mean in operational safety terms? Just detail what that means so that actually you can use the same matrix. You'll have a slightly different description depending on the context of where the risk is coming from, but we all understand what catastrophic means. So that's how I would look at doing that. So, for example, catastrophic financially might be, something that threatens the very existence of the business, operationally threatens several lives, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. I think that's right. Have a table of narrative descriptions for what that means in each different context, and then that can guide you to. So, what's the question? That integrating the management system would require a lot of upskilling of the regulator in this case.
And I think it's just an acknowledgement that, I agree, Stuart. But I think as other stewards, ANSA says, it is about engaging with your regulator early. I have seen an organisation, for example, that were trying to integrate their management systems across the organisation, so 145, flight ops, etc., as we would obviously advocate to do, and get a finding from one of the inspectors saying, no, you can't do that. And then the next year, get a finding to say you haven't integrated your management systems. As Stuart said, regulators are people too. They don't have the same commercial pressures, so they don't move at the same pace as small organisations can. Engage with them early, talk to them, explain what you're trying to achieve, and try and take them on the journey. But I do agree with you, Stuart, there's work to be done.
So I think that's all the questions in the chat. So I'll pose you one here, which is what do you think the biggest misconception about safety management systems in smaller organisations is? Should we start with you, Stuart? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I think I've got two. It's sort of I got two things to that. Is there's a misconception that bigger organisations are good at it. that you're behind the curve and it's really, really frightening and you need this massive machine behind you to so spoiler alert, not all big organizations have got a grasp on this either, or certainly maybe not getting everything that they want or could get out of it. So that's probably a misconception. But I think when you're trying to implement a smaller organization, the misconception is that we don't need it. We don't need this. We've already got this. We have lots of meetings. We have lots of management stuff, lots of reports, etc., etc. And that's the engagement piece with the leadership team again is, okay, we've got all of that. I think Bob very much touched on that earlier, as Ian did. There's a lot of data you've already got there. What are you trying to get out of this? The need is not necessarily just so that the safety manager can present us an SMS to the regulator, look clever, feel clever, and go home all good. It's actually making it of value to the leadership team and actually integrating some of the stuff that they're already doing. That actual operational performance is just based on safety performance. If you've got good safety performance, your operation will deliver. So I think it's a bit of a misconception that it's an add-on and another piece of work and something extra. It is just part of your day job and how you frame that is my view.
Thanks, Stuart. Bob, what do you think of that? What do you think is the biggest misconception about SMS in small organizations?
Well, again, I think that most of this would reflect off what Stuart just said, so I don't have any real new information about it. But, the whole idea is that from what I see, my perspective is that the small organizations just don't understand what SMS is. And to this day, they still come to me and they say, well, don't we have all that stuff already? Don't we do all that stuff already? And then when I tell them, have you looked at Part 5, in the regulations? Have you looked at the whole FAA thing? Have you done a gap analysis? Things like that. You get the deer in the headlights, and people they don't understand what SMS is. And that's one of the most frustrating parts for some of these companies is they think it's only for the bigger guys. We already do all that stuff. And again, I'm sort of coattailing off what Stuart just said. But I feel the same exact way. So I would say that that's the biggest setback is just a lack of understanding of what a safety management system is. And the fact that when these smaller companies do look at some of these other larger companies with a functional SMS, they're looking at those companies going, we can't do that. That's too complex for us. Not realizing that they will do the same thing as the big company, but just on a much smaller scale. They don't have, a lot of them have a problem with that concept. I don't know why. They just think it's too big for them to do, even though they're a small company.
Yes,
and that's about what, Stuart summed it up, and I'm just sort of, bouncing off of what he said, because I agree with it.
Yeah. So another question is, how do you, I guess I'd throw this one to Anita, because I think you've touched on it in your talk there. How do you make sure that you're focusing on the right risks without trying to manage everything, which is going to be too much for a small team?
I would say safety performance indicators are a very important and essential part of a SMS. It's important to look at the targets which are giving you the red alerts every single year. You could do quarterly or even monthly analysis if you'd like. The more frequent you do it, the better for you because you'll stay ahead of the issues. And it's really important for us to track the corrective actions and the risk mitigations we come up with. Most of the time, I notice that long-term corrective action plans tend to fall through the cracks. And this is where most of our issues come from. You identified an issue last year, you came up with a long-term corrective action plan, but somewhere along the lines you stopped doing it. So it's important for us to continuously make sure that the decisions we came up with are being implemented and they're being implemented correctly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's about, Ian, do you have any thoughts on that? How do you make sure you're focusing on the right things?
I think the important thing is not to be. So I went to an organisation once, a relatively small business jet operator, and they really proudly showed me their risk register with 300 risks on it. There was no way you could be actively managing 300 risks. And actually, their operation was really straightforward and was largely already covered in the regulation. And most of those risks weren't risks; they were non-compliances. I would say, look at your operation. So much of it will already be the controls are in the regulation. What are you doing that is different to what the context of the regulation? You know, I'm looking at Stuart Grimsey here, British Antarctic Survey. Yeah, you are doing a very specialist operation there that has some nuances. So you will need to risk assess elements of that operation that is very different from the regulation. But don't try and risk assess everything. So much is in the regulation. Where does the regulation not go far enough for you, or where are there things that you are doing that are unusual from the regulatory context? Everything else is managed through your regulatory compliance processes.
Yeah, I can imagine you going in there like Gordon Ramsay in Hell's Kitchen, and you know when they have a massive, great big long menu, and he goes, well, I won't repeat the words used, but he makes it smaller. He makes it smaller, something manageable, something that you can actually be sure that you can deliver on. It's a similar concept, I guess. Yeah.
Very much so.
I think Lucas has put a question in there about how AI could affect the core of an organization, and I think Lucas already there. That's about ring fencing the tasks you give to AI and making sure that it's not taking over, because it's quite good at some things, and it's understanding what it's good at and giving it tasks that don't get integrated into the actual heart of an organization. It's not ready for that yet, for sure. So that's how I'd answer that. But we're getting towards the end now, so I just wonder if can I pose you one last question? What's the one thing that organizations can do tomorrow to make their SMS more effective with the resources they have? Is that who wants to take that one first?
I'll jump in then. I would say that SMS is not really a manual and paper and processes and computer stuff. SMS is mostly a leadership exercise. Make sure that your leadership team all the way through the organization is competent and understands risk and what it is we're trying to manage.
Thanks, Ian. Anita, what do you think?
I would say that it's important to make sure you're focusing on the right things. Look at what your data is telling you, listen to what your people are telling you, and put all or a majority of your energy on that.
Thank you. Bob?
I think overall the most important aspect of it is the communication process. Of course, everything matters, but I think the communication process, that itself can kill an SMS, having lack of communication. Or if an employee submits a report that's supposed to be a voluntary report and not be punitive, and that employee winds up getting punished for submitting this report, that kills the whole system. It kills the whole culture, because then nobody's going to want to report it. Nobody's going to want to continue or start reporting. So, I think it all comes down to good communication, doing what you say you're going to do in your safety policy. What I always tell people is your safety policy is an implied contract between management and the employees. So if that safety policy says no employee will be reprimanded for submitting a report to the voluntary system, okay, if that person does get in trouble, then obviously you have you have just destroyed your whole system and then possibly the whole SMS. But it really comes down to, the communication. Are people willing to submit these reports, or are they afraid to submit them? And why are they afraid to submit them? Because they don't trust management. But all of this comes down, it's like, oh, well, you have the accountable manager that's supposed to buy in and support the safety management system. And yet that accountable manager can't tell you one bullet point on your safety policy. I've seen that before. To me, that's a problem. If you're just going to do lip service, you're not going to do buy-in, then you've already had a problem from the start or from the very top, and that's just going to flow down to the bottom, to the line employees, because they're going to be like, well, if upper management doesn't care, then we don't care. So again, it's all based on communication. If we, if we can't talk to each other, if we can't raise issues, even if some of it is verbal, then you have one of those constraints on your whole organizational culture, and obviously for your entire safety management system. So,
okay, thank you, Bob. Stuart, what do you think the one thing organizations can do tomorrow to make their SMS more effective?
I think for me, without sounding as if I'm trying to be down with the kids, it's keep it real. It's got to tell the story for everybody. It's got to be genuine, authentic, as the guys have said there. It's got to tell a story that everybody understands and knows what they need to do as a result of it, whether that's a risk picture or whatever. So however you do that, at whatever level you do that in a company, if it's real, authentic, and actually tells the real picture, you've got it. If you look at your SMS and you're not seeing any of that, back to the drawing board and rethink it.
Right, thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our time, so I'd like to thank everybody that joined us today, and especially our speakers who've been great, and as members of our panel. So I'll just go around the group there. Bob, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn, or through my company website, the Aviation Consulting Group.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I already got an invite from Stuart, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, they can contact me that way, or just do an internet Google search or whatever. I'm all over the place.
All right, thanks. Stuart, where can people find you?
Likewise, I'm on LinkedIn, or just get me through UKFSC. So happy to chat with anybody about anything relevant. So yeah, no problem.
Anita.
I'm on LinkedIn as well. Anita Favor.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Ian, where can people find you if they want to follow up?
LinkedIn again, or ian.holder@bainsimmons.com, or through our website, which I've just put into the meeting chat.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think the big takeaway is it doesn't have to be complex, doesn't have to be expensive, and it can still be effective. So thanks, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you perhaps on another webinar and continuing the discussion in the Flight Safety Committee. So thank you all and have a good day.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it. Take care.